Welcome to the Still Life podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience. With time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation, from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you, and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Still Life podcast. It is lovely to have you all here. Well, you're not actually here, but it's lovely to have you all listening, and I hope that you're really doing well. So this week's episode is a real monster, something that is difficult to get your arms around unless you're ready for it. And that is because we are talking about status. Now, societal status is something that's very hidden in plain sight. It's just underneath the surface of our conscious awareness, and for me at least, was guiding a lot more of my decision making and my behavior than I wanted to give it credit to until I started looking at it. So in this discussion, Jim really does a great job of setting the scene as always, describing why status is so important to us and how to notice it. We go through a couple of actual demonstrations where he changes body language with both myself and himself to show how you can feel status as an energetic field, and that's just bloody awesome in my opinion. And then I start asking him some pretty obnoxious questions like, why is it that some of his clients with extraordinarily amounts of status have problems still? And what do those problems look like? And how does he deal with them? And really, why do we have such a fascination with the topic in general? So as always, this is something that is rife with opportunity for self-growth, sometimes not always in the most palatable ways. But if you're ready for it, this can be an incredible way to sort of evaluate your own behavior and remap that towards your ideals if you want to do that. So as always, sit back and enjoy, although it might not be all that comfortable. Hello, Jim.
Hello. How are you, Henry?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Better than I've got any right to expect. I am the luckiest guy on earth.
Well, I'm going to fight you for that title.
Well, there's plenty of room on this throne.
Well, speaking of thrones, that kind of has a ring to our topic for today.
Nice segue, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this topic was, I think, one of my first big aha moments with you, and really marked an inflection point in changing my behavior.
Oh, I love this. I love the way that sounds.
Well, yeah, I know you do. And it was really remarkable for the work that we've done together, especially in my early 20s. Mm-hmm. And it is just a remarkable topic because of how close to the surface it is, right? Where it's like, we don't know that we're detecting it, but we're always detecting it.
Yeah.
So
always.
It's like there's just all of these. It's so ripe for aha moments because you're like, oh,
Yeah.
of course, you know.
Yeah.
And it then gets kind of annoying because it's like the answer to all of the problems, and well, also helpful to the solutions too.
There you go.
Because it's like, oh yeah, this is status at play.
It is.
And so I think this all takes root in us just being a social animal, and our survival being really rooted in the status hierarchy. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I think you're going to do a far better job of exploring this terrain than I
don't know. We'll see.
So I think to kick us off, Mr. George, could you please tell us what is status?
So if we just look at the word itself, we don't have to go very far to hit its Latin roots. It's not only derived from Latin, it is a Latin word, which in an odd way, to people who like words, it's pretty cool because we are now using a word that they were using thousands of years ago, and it hasn't changed that much. Status, the past participle of the verb stare, to stand, to stand. So at its most general, status is the standing of anyone or anything relative to some context. So that's pretty loosey-goosey. So at the most common level, most tangible level, the most superficial level, social status is anyone's standing in any group that they belong to. It's your standing in any group, any tribe, any culture. Now, why that should be important is something we can get into or not, but that's what status is. The standing of someone or something in some kind of hierarchy of context.
Brilliant.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
And so, as I was mentioning, it's very much detected by us, social status, all of the time.
Yep.
However, it seems to be just under the layer of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, first, let's explore where this thing comes from to maybe get a better idea of why it's so prevalent, why it's so important to us. I'd like to suggest that status goes all the way back to the origins, to the birth of our species. So our ancestors, we've talked a little bit about this in other podcasts. Our early ancestors were perfectly adapted to their environment. They're in the canopy of the trees. Their bodies are perfectly evolved and adapted. Big, long forearms, levered forearms, made for grabbing. And even their hindquarters, they're shorter, but equally powerful and prehensile, as they refer to it. Good for grabbing. Branches, foliage, trunks of trees, even hanging vines. So getting around in this environment is second nature to these creatures. They're lightweight, so they're agile. Everything they need is in that canopy of the trees. Shelter, food, even protection from larger, faster, meat-eating, ground-dwelling predators. So everything's good. Then the climate starts to change, and these trees start to reseed. And these early ancestors of ours find themselves pushed out of the canopy of the trees down onto the ground. So now they're not so perfectly adapted to their environment. They're not very big, they're not very fast, they're not very powerful. As individuals, they're mostly snacks for these larger, faster, more powerful predators. And I'd like to suggest that as individuals, they're on their way to extinction. Our numbers dwindled to a shockingly low number. Okay? And if those early ancestors of ours hadn't made a decision, I don't think you and I would even be here having this conversation. But they did. And I'm talking about an evolutionary decision. They didn't get a committee together and decide this. And I'd like to suggest that that decision changed the history of the planet forever. And what they decided to do was start working together in larger and larger and larger groups, driven by larger and larger brains. And those larger and larger brains develop the capacity for narrative. Stories, mostly fiction, by the way, but that gave rise to a perceivable and functional past, a present, the only thing that's actually real, and a future. The past and the future are in their minds now. They can control this. They can keep track of things. They can know where things are because they've been there before. They keep track of it in their minds. They can even begin to plan future things in this weird thing we've come to call the future. So these narratives have a beginning, a middle, a present, and an end. So I'd like to suggest that capacity became the social cohesion for larger and larger groups. I'm not talking 10, 12. I'm talking hundreds, thousands, eventually millions of people. Yuval Noah Harari writes brilliantly about this. This social cohesion, this narrative that allows us to believe we're deeply connected, and it holds us together. So now, this little species goes from the lower third of the food chain all the way up to the apex species on Earth. Okay? It gave them art, it gave them literature, it gave them science, it gave them technology. It took them to the moon and beyond. But what that larger group meant, and it was kind of a Faustian bargain, from that moment forward, your standing in the group became a matter of life and death. See, it's the group that can fight off these larger, faster predators, not the individual. So from that moment forward, your standing in any group became a matter of life and death. If that group, whatever group you belong to, decided for any reason that they didn't want you in that group and threw you out, that was tantamount to a death sentence, usually within a week or two. So I'm suggesting that is deeply embedded in our limbic system, in our brainstem, to this day. But this evolution thing kept going, and I'm suggesting that survival was gradually, inexorably, but almost unnoticeably shifting from our physical survival in the face of these predators, because eventually we've wound up making those predators almost extinct. The survival shifts from our immediate physical survival vis-a-vis these predators to our psychological survival, our emotional survival, the survival of the granddaddy of all our stories, the story we tell ourselves from early childhood based on our experiences. We tell others the same story, and eventually we believe we are. That narrative, that story, that fiction that we've come to call the ego. Now I'd like to suggest it's the survival of our ego in this larger group scenario. And you can see how that has led to our modern social status. Because how do you know what your standing is? How do you know what your status is? So you've asked why, if that's so important, is it so unconscious? Because we notice it more and more. It's like we haven't been paying attention almost. I'd like to suggest that, like all other survival strategies in our bodies, it's so prevalent, it's so everywhere and so urgent that we can't possibly keep track of all of it at a conscious level. Our conscious mind is the slowest part of our mind. This deep limbic survival, that aspect of our mind happens like that, and it doesn't deliberate. So I'd like to suggest that we can't, and to a greater degree, we don't want to be consciously aware of that phenomenon of status and our negotiation for it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now,
Yes, it does make sense.
If I've gone too far, you break it down, because it's so deeply embedded in itself that I almost can't just say one thing and just leave it hanging there, because there are a lot of moving parts to this thing.
Of course. And I just want to actually applaud you because of the depth that you've been able to understand this. And I'm not applauding you. I'm applauding you for the discipline of being able to maintain a practice of stillness.
Oh, thank you.
Because
there you go.
you quiet your mind down enough, and you can observe your mind.
Yes.
And you've just spent decades observing the mind and then looking at all of these different sort of informational sources to then superimpose your observations onto other people's sort of conclusions and sort of made sense of a cacophony of information.
Yeah.
So I want to just say thank you for the discipline, thank the sort of energetic awareness behind your eyes for just being what it is.
Sure. Every day I do.
Yeah, love getting a little woo-woo, love getting a little wacky away. But yes, no, let me break this down, and let me just make sure that I was tracking all of this as well as I am capable of.
You always do.
I wouldn't go that far. I would not go that far. Okay, so our ancestry, they're in the canopy of the trees, looked slightly different to how we look now. Longer forearms, swinging branch to branch, right? Climate changes, and they're like, okay, we can't live up here anymore. Let's go down onto the ground. And the ground is bloody scary because there's a lot of predators out there that can, just pick us off instantly. And so we get down onto the ground, and I can only imagine more exposed. And so at that point, probably standing more upright, looking around. And in order to survive, we had to work as a group. And that working as a group stabilized our tribes or our bands to start with, and gave us a survival advantage so that we didn't get picked off by those predators, because we could do things like defend ourselves with multiple people, I would assume. And then because of the ability to have to understand each other and understand how to cooperate as a group, our minds started to get bigger. With bigger minds come more sort of features of those minds. So understanding the hierarchy was very important to our survival as well. And there's also probably a bunch of other stuff that comes with having a bigger brain.
Oh, we haven't even touched it.
But let's not get into that, because we can start talking about fire and agriculture, but then we're going to get really derailed from what we're after. But the main importance to what you were talking about of these bigger brains is to be able to support a narrative. And this is a fiction that our mind creates, past, present, future. I say fiction because you mentioned that past and future are kind of made up. The only thing that we're really accessing reality through is the present, but the past and the future help us to plan and to understand and to learn. And so we have a very useful fiction of ourselves being our story. And we're also using this ability to plan into the future to help to cooperate. And that cooperation then sort of has this runaway feedback loop where it gets bigger and better. The mind gets more developed because of the advantages that we're getting. And with a more developed mind come more la-di-da-di-da. This goes to what you mentioned as a Faustian bargain, because we get so allured by the story of ourselves that we forget the larger piece to what's going on. I want you to just put a pin in that, because clarifying Faustian bargain for me, I think would be really helpful. And then there's this evolutionary lag period where, because this happened and was so critical to our survival 70 to 100,000 years ago, it was really embedded deeply within us. Having that embedded deeply within us is hard to get rid of. It's kind of like first in, last out. You know, we're not just all of a sudden going to miss things that are critical to our survival.
And be clear on what it is that's embedded. Our place in the larger group. That's what's embedded. That's life and death. Not the idea of a bigger brain or anything else. It's that. Where you stand is life and death.
And how do we make this really clear? Because the thing is that we're so distant from that ancestry that we have to like fantasize about it. And we don't have like this parallel example like, well, do you remember at camp when you got kicked out and you felt like really terrible?
I like to suggest we don't have to go that far. All we have to do is climb into our own experience. What does it feel like when you are, in one way or another, snubbed by a group that you need to belong to? What does that feel like? I don't have the right sneakers on, and for some reason, my body's responding like I'm going to die. See, it's important to get sort of the roots of this thing. Physiological evolution takes much longer than the changing of the environment does. And we're mapping stuff onto existing systems as we grow.
Brilliant.
If that helps, because we've got to understand why.
It does, and it goes right to this point that you were making earlier, where it started out with physical.
Yeah.
It started out with like the things that are actually tangible in and around us.
Yes.
And then shifted to more psychological, abstract notions of ways that we derive status, because we didn't necessarily need to run away from all of the marsupial lions after we killed them all.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So then we get to we already sort of touched upon the story of self, but I was scribbling as quickly as I could. And the last notes that I have are, we aren't necessarily consciously aware of it because we don't necessarily want to be aware of the negotiation that we have for status.
And we're unable to be because it's everywhere. If we were consciously aware of every status negotiation going on, we couldn't do anything else.
Can you give me an example of that?
What we're doing right now. In fact, in a little while, let's play with what lies under this so we can demonstrate it. You can feel it. So can everybody in our audience. You actually feel that. The example is an analogy. Let's make one of our little analogies between this survival mechanism and the survival mechanism of your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your breathing, your endocrine system. If you had to be conscious of all the dynamics of those different systems, you'd be dead right now because you'd have dropped the ball. At some point, oh shoot, I forgot, my heart stopped beating. Boom, over you go.
It's a really good thing I'm not in charge of that
No,
stuff.
me too. I just stood up. It's like, oh crap, I forgot. I've got to get my blood pressure up because the blood has to fight gravity to get in my brain. It's doing that automatically, thank God, because I'm thinking about what shoes I'm wearing. So in the same way, these status exchanges that are going on in everything we think, feel, say, and do. Status isn't just person to person. Status is person to animal, person to thing, even person to space in a room. It's everywhere. So you've nailed it. You totally get this.
Well, it's because we've been working with it for a while. And I say we've been working with it for a while because really the aha moment that I had with this was, you mentioned a lot of subconscious values that drive our behavior.
Yes.
You do a whole workshop on just values alone.
Yep. Yep.
And when getting into these states of stillness and getting distance from the narrative that is consistently self-serving,
Yes.
you can start to analyze your behavior forensically
Yes.
and see what's driving your behavior.
Yes.
And the big aha moment for me was I was in college and at the time wanted to be a doctor in the Navy. And here I am just running as quickly as possible at status symbols, you know, because having not one but two titles before my last name, what does that say about me?
Sure.
It says, aren't I important? And look how high up the social hierarchy I am,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And what I then realized was that it was more of a status grab because I was fantasizing about things that I hadn't gotten yet,
Yes.
and was using that to sort of just gain instantaneous status in the culture that I was in at that time.
Yeah.
And was telling people that it was because I wanted to help people. Now, if I then forensically looked at my behavior, it's like, Henry, I don't know if you really want to help people all that much, because how much money have you given to the homeless in the past, you know, however many days, right? You're saying this, but when I actually looked at my behavior rationally, it became very clear that it was telling a different story, and that the value that was driving my behavior,
the status of a siren going by, right, is totally more important than anything we're saying.
absolutely.
And yet, it's gone. Are we going to let it run our lives?
No.
So watch what happens when you recognize, oh, okay, that exchange is over now, but it doesn't have to ruin what we're doing.
Absolutely.
You don't have to ignore it completely. May be coming here. This place may be on fire.
Let's hope not.
But we can keep going if we're aware of the processes going on inside of us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's actually a beautiful segue as well, because at first this was a abrupt confrontation with the reality of who I was versus what I was telling myself that I was.
Yes.
And that can be very uncomfortable. However, when understanding the processes that are going on, then that actually empowered me to change them.
Brilliant.
And knowing that it's like, well, do I really want status to be driving my behavior? Do I really want that power grab, knowing that it has absolutely no correlation to my internal state of well-being, and that it is an abstraction? Do I really want that to be what I spend my time, my energy, and my attention in this day and age doing? And that's why I'm just so excited to be talking about this, because that was a real confrontation, you know, that
and
I had with
it was a
myself.
heroic one in my view, because now hundreds, I don't know, thousands of people we've worked with, those who take that step, that hero's first step on a hero's journey, in my book, have done something that is so important, but it's uncomfortable at first to figure out where you actually are. So a couple of things. Number one, and I'm glad you brought this up. Number one, I'd like to suggest that we investigate why do we need a conscious and a subconscious mind anyway? Why do we even need it? What is it? What the hell is this subconscious mind, the unconscious behavior? I'm suggesting that in an oversimplified way, the subconscious, the unconscious mind, is the place we shove stuff that we either can't or won't deal with right now. And in psychology, they talk about repression of information, experience. That's an unconscious process. I can't handle this, and I didn't even know I can't handle it, so it does it for me. And then there's conscious repression. I'm sort of knowing this, it's making me feel uncomfortable, so I'm going to shove it down there and we'll deal with it some other time. But it's very important to understand what you did, because if we're going to navigate this journey, this life journey, which is unique to you and every one of us, there isn't a single human being in history who's had the same life. And there's no owner's manual for you. You got to figure it out. The navigation of that step, like any navigation, requires a couple of pieces of information. Number one, you got to know where you are in order to navigate. And you've got to have an idea of where you want to go. Now, that can change during the course of your navigation. And you also need some other things. It's nice to have a third reference point, triangulate, but let's not get technical on it. If you don't know where you are not going to get where you want to go. You'll get somewhere, but if you think you're here, but you're actually a couple of miles away, you're not going to navigate to where you want to go. I guarantee you will get someplace, but just not where you want to go. So this subconscious is, in the weirdest way, the rest of your mind waiting for you to be able to get your together, okay, enough to be able to deal with this repository of stuff you either can't or won't deal with. It keeps us functional in the present moment. But at some point, unless we want this to build up to the point where we can't function anymore, we have to start dealing with these things, but we're dealing with them with an evolved self. When they were being repressed, we didn't have what we needed. Now it's very possible that we do. A lot of the work that I do personally with people and we do in groups is remembering you're not the same person you were when this stuff got shoved down. You may have resources that person back then didn't have. You're the same person, you've just evolved. So let's get those two together and maybe pull some of this stuff out of the unconscious, be aware of it, and have some choice, have some volition in our behavior. So this is what you did. You took the first step. I actually want to know what's driving me. How many of rock stars, celebrities, the reason I want to be a rock star, the reason I want to be a celebrity is I want to help. I want to help people. Really? Okay, so let me get this right. You want to stand up on stage and keep sucking attention and energy endlessly because there's never enough, because you're there to give to people? But if you were really conscious, utterly conscious, the reason I'm doing this is I'm an emotional black hole. There's just not enough to fill this up. That's not going to make me feel better. But I'm suggesting if you realize that, you're on your way to feeling better, not temporarily grabbing a little attention and then needing more, but long term, because you're filling this up now. You're on your way. That's a promise. That's what you've done. I got to watch it. I still get to watch it. These people are getting to watch it as we do what we do.
Okay, so I'm going to pause you for a second because I'm starting to overflow with just excitement and questions and just a lot of stuff. But I want to, it seems like a pretty good analogy, or at least a metaphor, go out on a limb here and say that because of the status that you demand as a man in your 70s with all of this wisdom, right? It's something that I feel myself, again, going back to more of our primal roots. Like, I just kind of want to sit on the floor with a blanket and just like listen and probe, right? And these insights that you're sharing, I believe, gave me the psychological strength to then be able to look at the lumpy carpet in my mind where I had just been stuffing a bunch of stuff that I wasn't ready to look at.
Yeah.
But because you had created the space that where truth was lionized, where truth was something that's important, and because you had equipped me with the tools to be able to still my mind and be able to quell the emotional reactivity, I was able to take that step in doubting the biggest story that I tell myself, which is, who am I? And actually looking at the evidence and being like, this is telling another story. Now, you started to create an analogy yourself with navigating, right? With navigating, not navigating. You know, status really throws off the way that I speak. And so now it's just bleeding into all of the words that I'm trying to spit out. But you went into this analogy with navigating, and you can't really understand where you're going unless you truly know where you are.
At any given point, you're constantly having to figure out where you are.
I think this is such a key point. Would you mind illustrating it for us?
Well, navigation always has to do with figuring out where you are. So, whether you're navigating by boat or navigating through your life, you need to know at least two things. Yes, you need to know where you're going. You need to know your goal, but you also need to know where you are, really. Not where you wish you were, but where you actually are, right now. We tend to forget that second part. See, without knowing where you are, always, you can't actually chart a course to where you want to be. So, if you think you're here, zoot, and you're trying to reach there, but you're actually way over here, well, chances are you're never going to get where you want to go. And you may not like where you wind up. So try to remember that as you navigate through your life. Yes, you need to know where you're going, your goal, but you always need to know where you are right now. That's where a little stillness comes in. It always brings you right back to here and now.
You then sort of went on to mention how this is not a leap that a lot of people make in terms of doubting their own narrative, doubting their own story. And you can see it all over the world as people will get into politics or they'll get into music or whatever, and they'll say, oh, I want to do it because it's helping people. And then it's like, well, actually, if you analyze the behavior, it's more so attention, attention, attention. So this leads me to a question here where it's like, it doesn't seem as if more status equals more happiness.
Oh, brilliant.
Why is it that we're so, as a species, attracted to hoarding it? Because you look around and people will make crazy decisions to get more status at the cost of their own well-being. You know, this is, you look at the job market, people are like, yep, cool, sign me up for all of these other tasks and responsibilities and roles that are eroding my core because of the status that I will then gain. Do you mind shedding a bit more light onto that?
So we get to the fact that, and I want to suggest this, I don't want to state it as a fact. There's something far deeper than this very surface level of social status. And this is where status gets interesting. I'd like to suggest there's a much deeper energetic level to status. I'd like to suggest that status at its core can be thought of almost as a field of energy that exists, and there is a constant movement. It's a dynamic field, like all fields. And remember from our discussion of spirit what a field is. Non-physical force or influence, but it has a measurable effect on the physical domain. And in this case, we can feel that energy. And that energy, that field, is very different than the manifestations of it that we're always clamoring for. Okay? So I'm suggesting that we can sense that deeper energy, and it relates to space. It literally relates to space and our relationship to that space. And if you like, we can test this right now. The thing that's interesting, you remember our discussion about spirit, practical spirituality. Practical spirituality, number one, has to be simple enough to be able to at least understand what it is, maybe not all the mysteries of it. It has to be useful in our day-to-day lives, not something you do on Sunday and then spend the rest of your time not doing it. I'd like to suggest that it has to be verifiable. We have to be able to test it. It shouldn't be that some goofball on high states something and we just go, okay, and believe it. We should be able to test it individually. So if you'd like, let's examine the existence of this energetic field and test it right now.
Let's do it.
Okay? So do me a favor. Don't move or change anything. Okay? I'd like you to go inside, and I want you to just notice your physical posture right now. And as you do, I want you to notice an almost irresistible urge to change it. Okay? I'm suggesting that's because the status has changed so subtly that your body wants to shift based on that shift. Okay?
This is crazy. It genuinely, like,
Can you feel it? It's like, oh my God.
I feel like frozen, but
Yes.
like I'm resisting.
Yes.
I'm even
Thank
moving
you.
my hands. It's
Thank you.
hard.
Don't move anything.
Okay.
And I'm asking our viewers to do the same thing. Do this too. Jump in here because you can feel it. So describe to me your body posture right now, and then tell me what it feels like.
My back is straight because I was slouching earlier, but I wanted to make sure that I was in the camera shot.
This is great.
Now it's
Yeah.
erect.
Yeah.
And
But that wasn't necessarily a status move, was it?
no.
That was a logistical move.
Yes.
Good. Keep going.
And just describing my body posture.
Yeah, yeah.
So my arms are fairly open, right? But prepared to write.
Yes.
I've got my chest facing you, my eyes facing you.
Yes.
And my chin tilted slightly downwards.
Yes.
My knee is right up against the table leg.
Comfy, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's
Good. That's perfect.
cool.
And I hope everybody's done the same thing. Just notice your posture. Now do me a favor. Sit more upright. Forget whether anybody can see you on camera. Okay? Bring your shoulders back and down a little. Okay? Raise your head slightly. A little bit higher. Keep looking right at me, but raise your head. Now, put your pen down. Turn your palms up, but not forcefully, comfortably up. And be careful you don't bump anything, but just open your arms up even more. You don't have to go way out here. Just open them up. Just feel that. Now, unfortunately, our audience can't see this, but under the table, I want you to open your legs up. And it may bump into the table, but that's okay. Open them up, okay? Point your toes out, okay? Now, raise your head a little bit more because you're trying to adjust it back down because that may not be a comfortable position. Raise it up even higher. Keep looking at me. But there you go. Now, shoulders back, down. What does that feel like?
Quite empowering.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's when I opened up my arms, I could literally feel like, you know when you do this as a kid and
Yes.
you hold that, like,
Yes.
I could feel this like energetic bubble kind of expanding.
Yes.
Which was kind of cool.
Do you hear your own language? An energetic bubble. That's not a freaking metaphor. I'd like to suggest you are more powerful right now. That may not be comfortable because you keep trying to bring your head back down and keep trying to bring your arms in because you may not be comfortable at that level of power right now. But let's call that an extreme. Let's call that a high status posture.
Can we dig into why this might be uncomfortable for me?
Sure.
And let me have my best guess.
Sure.
When talking about just the underlying status dynamic of the two of us,
Yeah.
it's like, and this is where it gets so uncomfortable. This is where it's like, I don't want to acknowledge this,
Yeah.
but it's the writing's on the bloody wall.
Yeah.
It's like, I am fundamentally of lower status, right? Because I'm asking you questions and you've been around on this earth and you've gathered so much wisdom. Listen to me justifying why you have more status than I do.
That's
right?
exactly right at a deeper level.
At a deeper level, and
Yeah.
because I need to make sure that I can preserve something,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Yes.
the funny thing about just watching this.
Yes.
Anyway, so doing this is elevating my status to a position that might not be comfortable for my subconscious, knowing that it's like, actually, that might be risky, because if we go tens of thousands of years back,
Yeah.
and I start doing this in the tribe,
Yes.
and one of the elders is like, actually, you need to either get checked or get out of here.
Yes.
Then,
Or what else might have happened if this were all about physical survival? You do this to a physically superior example of Homo sapiens, what happened?
get the shit kicked out of me.
Right. But can I suggest something? At the energetic level, what's happening here is you are allowing much more of this field of energy to move through you. I can feel it from here. It's my job to do so. I'm suggesting that energy is a clue as to who and what you truly are if you were to stop the narrative that's limiting that. But let's try something now.
Mm-hmm.
Bend your spine forward now a little, okay? Notice what happens to your arms automatically, okay? Now, not only bring them back in like this, fold them over your midsection like this. Note the difference between this folding and this folding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fold it over your midsection. Lower your head a little bit more, okay? Tilt your head down, tilt down. Good, keep looking at me. Now, round your shoulders more to the front and bring your shoulders just slightly up toward your ears, just slightly. Look at me and look down. Notice what you did automatically.
It's hard to look at you.
looked down.
Yeah, it's hard to look at you.
Yes. Bring your knees together and hold them
They're already together.
together.
Yeah.
Point your toes inward and turn slightly away from me, either direction. Keep looking down and then look up. Look down and look up. Look down, look up. How does that feel to you?
I feel like a dog that's just been yelled at.
Yes, yes. Now, some people at the surface level would call that body language. And it is, but the body language is acting in response to this energy. You're trying to block the flow of that energy moving through your body. Every single part of your body is blocked off. You're making yourself small. And I'm suggesting that the narrative that you've been telling yourself from the time you were a little kid, like all the rest of us, a narrative that begins at a point where every one of us is high status. Kids don't know from this energy. They're just letting that energy flow. But they learn through experience, wow, if I do that, maybe we'll have some conflict. So they start developing this narrative, this egoic story, and it is limiting who they actually are. This deeper energetic thing that's coming through a body, but in order to avoid conflict or resolve a conflict, I have to adopt these postures. I have to limit in any way I can the amount of energy that I'm allowing to fill this space. Or I don't have to. I let it go. I let it fill the room. Actors have mastered this. I'm talking about stage actors. Actors can walk out on stage, having practiced this, and fill an entire theater with this energy. They're not like jumping around. They just walk out. It's like, boom. Really good singers, performers, musicians do the same thing.
Can I go back to normal?
Oh, please. I'm sorry. It's
super
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
isn't
it
it
sucks.
Good. So let me suggest.
But like, I had to honor the status.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'm not gonna get out of there.
So that lower status posture, an extreme, that high status posture, an extreme, there's an ocean between them, and you can actually go farther. Okay? But don't mistake this as body language, so I'm going to pretend to have more status than I do. Because there's nothing more obvious than someone pretending to have more status than they have. They'll strut around like some banty rooster pretending to be high status. It's actually an incredibly low status thing to do.
And we're so acute at detecting that.
And we don't even know we are.
But we can say like, oh, I don't like that bratty teenager.
Yes.
I don't like his attitude.
Yes.
You know, and it's
Yeah.
what we're saying is that these...
I'm saying it's that energy, the flow of that energy, and the fact that that energy is being mediated by the narrative, the fiction that we tell ourselves that we've come to call the ego. Remember what practical spirituality even is. The expansion of your scope of sense of self. An endless process, okay, of removing the obstacles, the limits, self-imposed limits on who and what you actually are. Not egoically expanding. I'm not talking about puffing yourself up and saying, I'm the most fabulous person on earth, and you're not. But your sense of self expands. It starts to include other people. It starts to include the whole world. I mean, it expands infinitely. It's an endless process. There's no limit to it. Practical spirituality is going beyond where you are and what you perceive yourself to be forever. And I'm suggesting that isn't always comfortable. You're always at the edge. But this testable thing, where you can feel that energy, you can literally feel it as it's blocked or as it's allowed to flow. It's much deeper than this very superficial, but very tangible social status. It runs deeper than that. Does that make sense?
It makes such clear sense.
Good.
And I loved what you said when you mentioned that this type of work has you always at the edge, because I believe that to be the case. I think that when observing most who get exposed to this, there are places where they plateau.
That's right.
And I know this because I've felt it in myself.
Sure.
Where it's like I've stayed at one level for a long time because I did not want to look at the uncomfortable truth that was right in front of me.
Good for you.
And, you know, that was, let's take a tangible example, right? I used to drink and recreationally take a bunch of drugs,
Sure.
you know, a lot of weed in particular, right?
Yeah.
And that was when we had founded and started Still Life. And the hypocrisy of trying to tell people that you can really implore and understand self and mind while hammered smoking a cigarette is really not the best way to advertise the results of what this practice can give you.
Right.
And I just endured with that level of hypocrisy and ineptitude. I wasn't willing to look at it because I would just keep justifying my way around it.
Yes.
Because I didn't want to look at, actually, I'm doing all of these things because I'm trying to fill a hole within myself.
Good.
Right? And I'm trying to find, firstly, there's groups that I've identified with that I find meaningful, you know, they're larger than myself, and I'm believing a story about myself. I was also really good at drinking, you know, like I just didn't really get hungover and could, you know, drink a lot of people under the table and would try my best to drink everybody under the table.
How did you feel when you did that? I don't mean the day after. I mean drinking and the other person goes under the table. How do you feel?
Especially if they're bigger than me, pretty good.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and looking at that
For a while.
For a while.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
And so when actually analyzing that behavior, I had plateaued there for a long time. And the reason that I'm saying this is because stillness is the absolute key to all of it.
It is.
Because if I was not getting still, I would have kept enduring and stayed at that plateau.
That's right.
But there's only so many times where you can, like, stillness is looking at the lumpy carpet. You know, it's like, there are lumps in that carpet.
Yes.
Are you going to do anything? Are you going to clean the bloody room?
Yeah.
And if you don't get still, you just absolutely stay there. When I say stillness, it's like that word is a representation.
It is.
It's a state of mind where the narrative is quiet.
Yes.
There is no story going on between your ears.
And let me suggest something, because you raised the key point here. As more and more neuroscientific research comes through, it is astounding how much our brains make up stories. Often after the fact, as a way to explain something that they can't possibly explain. That's their job, to make sense of this world. And so you can do things and justify, in your mind, make up a story, mostly fiction, and literally justify anything. And when you start on a journey that says, I literally don't want to keep feeling artificially good, but increasingly start feeling more and more bad about the way things are going, it has to hit a certain point. And those plateaus you're talking about happen forever. You just break through that plateau. You break through that plateau. The reason that actually you don't have more or less status than I do, I'm a kid at this. I've been doing it for a long time, but only relative to a bunch of young kids. Relative to the scope of time, I've barely gotten started. And that's how it feels once you get on this journey. You embrace the fact that I don't know everything. You stop trying to know and start climbing into knowing. I don't already know. And any descriptor isn't the thing. I'm now moving toward the thing. And so are you.
Can I pause you for a second?
Please.
Okay, so I think that humility is going back to beliefs.
Yeah.
One of the strongest beliefs that I've observed within you, because you mention it, it's like, you mentioned how you are radically humble, and it's not coming from a place of, look at me and look how humble I am. Far from it. It's actually, when continuing to observe self, it's this ongoing unraveling of just the human experience, that there is no finish line. You don't complete human, right? You continue to do it. You continue to evolve. This energetic force continues to get excited to understand itself when in the right context. And this is why I just want to thank you for the 1000th time, because your ability to help give me stable footing to understand myself and then to continue to push has got me into a belief set where it's like similar to like David Goggins, where I just get this high of like, where is it? Where's the next, next thing? And that to me is, it's so beautiful because it's so damn selfish, where it's like, I'm just so hyper focused on me, but at the same point, it makes me actually behave in ways that are so much more selfless. You know, I'd completely abandoned the doctor in the Navy English accent, like line up ladies sort of mentality that I was going for, so that I could actually line my behavior with trying to help people.
And what you love, because you've never mentioned medicine. You've mentioned being a doctor. And I'm suggesting you're now doing what you love, and energetically your status has gone through the roof. It's just not relative to somebody else. You're helping people. You're right.
And well, the thing is that this is an aha moment, ting, it's like real time. I didn't love medicine. I loved getting better grades than the people next to me. And it's like, when looking at that, it's like, that's ugly. But at the same time, it's like, well, actually, that's beautiful. That's human. Like, look at these biomechanical meat suits that we get to operate. Yes, they come with some default settings that are pretty hard to understand unless you take a step away and really look at it rationally. But that to me is freedom. And aligning my behavior with freedom over with the hoarding of status has given me such a deep feeling of meaning that it's like you can strip anything. Maybe I'm talking more than I would actually physically react, but like it feels as if to me it's like you can take so much of my life away from me, and it wouldn't matter because of something that I have deep in.
Who you really are. The rest of it isn't who you really are. It's what you're doing. It's what you're inhabiting. See, this is the beauty of this. You said it, not me. I'm not telling you this is going to happen. You just told me. You told everyone else. There's something more going on here than your body. And stillness will help you see it yourself. Then it will help you feel it yourself. And then, as the narrative stops, you are it. Like, wow. And lest that this may sound like I'm saying, then do this rather than your life. Henry, you come back into your life with this perspective, your life is better. Because now, if you decide to be a doctor, I'm totally with you. Let's get you an MD or a PhD right now. But not because you want to get mating opportunities. Let me put it put it that way. But because you love being a doctor, you love the medicine part. But I don't think that's what you want. I think you've fallen right into the sweet spot of what it is you love, because you're doing it whether anybody knows or not. That gets to my next point. Status is relative, like everything else in this universe, Henry. Status is relative. It's relative to the group, It's even relative to what group you choose to be in, okay, or don't. But if we have learned anything from Einstein and his special theory of relativity, this relativity is reciprocal. That status is relative to the individual and the scope of that individual's sense of self. Now, some groups have formed around the outward pursuit of the physical domain, the material world, stuff. Some groups, other groups, have formed around the more inward pursuit of the non-physical, we'll call spiritual or essential. Okay? I'd like to suggest that status exists in both groups as long as ego is limiting your scope of sense of self. I am an isolated, separate, individual human being desperately trying to fill an unfillable hole in the middle of my fake being. It's a narrative. You get quiet enough and what you are is self-evident. You can feel it just like you did. You weren't feeling just Henry there when we did our little experiment. You were feeling something much bigger than Henry flowing through you freely, unencumbered. And then you closed it off, which is what this narrative does. It defines you. It restricts that to a narrative. And I'm not saying you can't come back into that narrative. But what I'm saying is the endless increase of that perspective makes your life better every single day. I'm living proof that an absolute idiot can do this. Who and what you are is an incredible being. Not an already done. It's a being. It just keeps going. And I can't thank you enough for raising something that on the surface seems to be, oh, yeah, okay, here's this social status. Wow, yeah, what kind of car do you drive? Those are symbols, paltry symbols. And I'd like to suggest that the seeking of status, the seeking of it for its own sake, is not only a low status thing to do, what it results in is just a reinforcement of the lack of ability to perceive who you really are. It's just reinforcing this limited narrative. But the energy is what you can feel. Status seeking is what happens when people are trying to get more because they feel they are less. You let that energy come up. And it takes a hero to make the first couple of steps. Let that energy start coming up. Recognize who you are. I'm not saying so you can be a doctor. I'm saying so that you can sit quietly and make a park bench a better place to be. Because people will begin to feel this. They've had hundreds of thousands of years to develop the acuity. Someone will walk by and just stop for no reason, sit down next to you, because something deeper in them is going, what is this? I don't have the right shoes. I don't have the right jewelry. I'm not driving the right car. I'm not hanging out with the right people. They'll sit down and there'll be a magic interaction take place. And they'll get up and they'll thank me. And I will, to avoid dropping their status by blocking them, not say to them, it's not me. I'll acknowledge it. Well, you're welcome. Thank you. But But the fact of the matter, it's not me, this egoic story. That's why I'm trying to just let as much of this story thing go. And I can't thank you enough for doing it, because as you continue to make this amazing vector, I can't even imagine where it's going to wind up. It doesn't have a finite bound to it. And I'm saying that about anybody who's watching or listening to this right now. This applies to you, but in your own unique way. Don't mistake current social status for what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something deeper, real status. Real status. Where you own the space in a room. We've had a number of experiences just today. I won't go into it, but some people were around earlier, and they were kind of like, what's going on in there? There's no status of any kind here. We're not anybody worth knowing. But there's something there. There's some energy there. They're picking up on it, and then their conscious mind's going, well, yeah, I don't see a celebrity. I guess I better leave. But strangely enough, they come back. They can feel it. Okay?
An example that you gave maybe about 5 years ago, where it's like, how would you feel driving a Lamborghini up to an ashram?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you've got status in one context, and you take it to another context, and it absolutely crumbles, you know?
You're
Because-
lowering your status.
Exactly, right? People will pity you, like, oh, look at that mentally sick Westerner, right? And
Yeah.
the thing that I just wanted to really zoom in on is status in spirituality,
Yeah.
especially when it goes very wrong, because I think something that is the elephant in the room is like how many cults have been formed where the leader accumulates enough status. And the thing with status is that there is a correlation between status and mating opportunities, especially for males.
Yes.
And that's where it can be manipulated and taken to very ugly places. And then you get these sensational news articles, documentaries, stuff like that. And this isn't just reserved for cults. You look at religion across the globe, and there is misuse and abuse of status, as well as in other situations. And I think that the ability to systematize and provide rituals and texts have allowed this idea framework of being able to drop into other states of being.
Yeah.
It's allowed that to spread, and it's actually been a really good force for cooperation across the world. However, it can be taken in the wrong direction if people aren't necessarily having that experience, aren't recognizing the status that they're accumulating and then abusing, and then having other groups look at it and be like, I don't want to identify with that group because that group connotes XYZ.
Sure.
Right? So that was just a real garble. There's not quite a question, but one's coming, where it's like, how does status interact with spirituality? And how do you feel as if it's best to navigate effectively, as so people understand that there is something there to pursue, but that it doesn't necessarily have to come with a lot of the baggage and the stories that have maybe muddied that water?
Sure.
Huge question.
Well,
And I'm not
let's
sorry.
see if we can't draw a bit of a distinction between spirituality and religiosity. Because when anyone, and I want to be very clear here, I'm going to actually slow down and be very clear. When anyone has a spiritual experience, because it's anyone's birthright to do so. And this is my own opinion. I mean, who am I? But I'd like to suggest that that experience is actually having a moment to remember who you really are underneath all this narrative, this story that's limiting who you are. So, big difference between having that experience and suddenly all of this becomes self-evident. You have this experience where you realize something that can't even be put into words. It's profound. It's always been there. That's the common denominator. This has always been there. I just couldn't perceive it. So what do you then do? You want to share it. But remember our discussion of analogs, of analogies. We're mapping information, qualities, characteristics of something we know, we understand, onto something that we don't. By definition, that analogy isn't the thing. It's just helping us get closer than we are right now. I got no clue what that spiritual experience is that you had, Phil. So, okay. So Phil is describing this to me. I'm hearing it. I'm one of thousands of people who realize this guy's special. What I don't understand is he's not special in the sense that I can't have the same experience. What happens, though, is I'm now getting this descriptor. I'm mistaking the finger that's pointing at the moon, as they say in the Buddhist tradition, for the moon. I'm mistaking this analogy. I'm taking this analogy too literally. And I've missed the whole point. It's kind of like this, but only in a very narrow sense. If you're doing this with an infinite experience, you are trying to define the infinite. You get the almost humor to that. It's like, let's try to understand how a bird works by tearing its wings off and studying its anatomy. This is what a bird is about. You've just taken that off. And, well, yeah, there's feathers, and it's ornithology, and, yeah, okay.
Can you do the sound effect for the bird, please?
So, anyway.
Love it when he does that.
So, you start there, and then you realize the people who haven't had this experience, who are now a part of this social structure, are now dealing with this experience, but from an egoic standpoint. Their story is limiting who and what they actually are, their experience. Now it's all about control and status and all the other human things that are perfectly okay. The problem is we're not talking about a car company. We're not talking about a club. We're talking about spiritual pursuit. Authentic spiritual pursuit is tricky water, by definition. So I'd like to suggest that, like all things practical spirituality, look at where the energy goes in any organization. Quietly observe where the energy goes. Is the energy going toward this charismatic person who may or may not have had this experience? Or is the energy coming to the people who are, it's only a matter of time before they have exactly the same experience in their own way? There's no status here. There's an attempt to remove the need for status from the equation. I'm telling you, this is your birthright. Yeah, you've got to do some work because there's a lot of momentum built up around these narratives. And your infinite self, trying to have a finite experience, has to undergo some interesting transitions in order to have it.
Yeah. And just to build off of that, after having watched Larry Kazanov's interview maybe 4,000 times doing that Four Titans edit, it's so beautiful what he says about Thich Nhat Hanh and you, and saying it's like,
so sweet.
it's when Ty mentioned it's not about, he walked out of the room when Larry tried to make it about him in terms of the documentary, and he's like, no, it's about mindfulness. And I believe you to be doing the exact same thing intentionally, where you're coming from a place of purity. It's like, well, you know, I've compounded all of these experiences of knowing that I'm not that narrative, that voice in my head, and I've taken so much distance that I've been able to see that, evaluate it, really understand it, love it, because it's a piece of me, it is me, but at the same time, not identify with it in certain areas, or when going back to identity, it's like, if you're going to identify with one thing, it's like, well, I'm not even going to include that. You know? But I just want to make that point, because you mentioned it earlier, where it's like, I want to be living proof that any idiot can do this. I hated it when you said that for the first 2 years of knowing you.
Because I'm an idiot.
No, but you're not. But the thing is like, this is where we get tied in semantics, because it's like, you are not, and I'm talking through you. Because like, I know just through my own experience that my narrative puts me into some really ugly cycles, right? But when I take a step back and I nurture that narrative and build through that and grow, it's a really beautiful thing. And I understand why you say anybody can do it. Because I really do think that I would attribute maybe 30% of your intelligence is directly to stillness. Like I think that
at least
if it weren't for that, like just your ability to process, to focus, to understand is just so greatly amplified that it used to piss me off, because I'm like, well, Jim, you're not an idiot. It's evident you were not an idiot. You know, you speak in perfect prose. It's like, that's just the reality of it. But I get what you're getting at, where it's like, no, this is in you. It's in me. All you got to do is tap into it authentically. And then you must be in so many weird sort of complex equations in your mind, where it's like, okay, how do I communicate this to that person so that they don't get the wrong impression, they don't get in. And firstly, it's actually like, how do I get me out of the way and bomb them with what this is? Because there is that acuity that is largely subconscious. Anyway, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just really wanted to highlight the fact that I think something to look for when pursuing spirituality is an authentic hallmark of having the experience is somebody saying, it's not me. You know,
don't look there.
It's not about the human thing, right? And you see this littered throughout all of the spiritual literature as well. So I think that was just a penny dropping for me now and in the past as well, that I just wanted to, raise a flag at. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, you didn't cut anything off. The point is, this is a dynamics. What I love about this, it's a back and forth. It's an inquiry into something that otherwise would remain unobserved, unexplored.
There's two things that I want to bring up.
Good.
Because one of them I mentioned earlier, which was, can you please flesh out what a Faustian bargain is? Because I remember having to Google it when leaving your office a while ago. And then from there, I don't think that these are necessarily connected. But after having just mentioned that interview and the series of interviews, you've worked with people with a hell of a lot of status in their lives. What do you think common problems and issues arise as? And when I mentioned being delicate in conversation a second ago, how do you help people navigate this? Because what I realized very quickly is that when you learn these truths in yourself, other people might not be ready to learn that within them. And actually, it's a pretty low status thing to do, to walk into an ashram and be like, you're all about status, and trying to rip somebody else down. That's actually playing the status game itself. It's a zero-sum game, because it's like, you go down, I go up. Would you mind just expanding a bit upon that as well? So Faustian bargain first, and then the people that you've worked with, what are common problems that have a theme of status?
So classic, I won't go into it, the classic story of Faustus is, bottom line, somebody makes a deal with the devil to get what they want, but the Faustian bargain is, oh, I didn't think this through. This is what I'm going to have to pay. Okay? It's an interesting read, a little dense, and it's not originally in English, but that's kind of what we're talking about. You make a bargain because you're backed up against the wall. And the Faustian bargain we were referring to is our species was going extinct. They didn't have to sit around and deliberate. They went for anything they had. And this, we're going to try working with larger and larger groups with these bigger and bigger brains, from an evolutionary standpoint, that was a huge gamble. Because these babies take a lot of energy. That means you've got to be able to catch, pick, gather enough nutrients to keep this thing going. It better pay off. And it did. It did. But let me suggest something. If this is too much, just throw it away. Pretend like you didn't hear it. Evolution is an ongoing process. I'd like to suggest that behavioral strategy, that physiological strategy of becoming self-conscious, storytelling beings may, in the end, wind up being an evolutionary dead end. Because we've not only wiped out every megaphonic predator out there, we've driven almost all of the remaining ones to the point where they're going extinct. We have one predator, and one predator only, and that's us. We've met the enemy is us. In all our tribal conflicts and all our status-driven storytelling glory. We have, even as a species, wiped out every other human species, because we weren't the only ones. Homo sapiens is just one of many human species that have come and gone on the face of the earth.
That sounds like something that we swept under the rug as well.
Well, because we're not the most horrific, warlike people on earth. We're lovely people. We're the intelligent. We're the wise humans. We call ourselves Homo sapiens. Well, take a look around. We're on the brink of killing our own species. Any animal knows. Don't crap in your own bed. We're doing that right now so we can gain more status as a species. What I'm suggesting is this evolution hasn't stopped. And I'm suggesting the next evolutionary step, if we want to take it, go inside, appreciate why that storytelling was so important, develop the ability to stop the storytelling for a while. You can always come back to it, but stop it long enough to realize it's a story. Get quiet enough to realize I'm literally the same stuff at this very deep level, fundamental level, as you are. And understand that these narratives that have gone on for generations, that have us tearing one another's throats out, if you trace them back far enough, half the time they're early brothers doing the fighting. These tribes are very close. All of us. Our similarities vastly outnumber our differences. And I'm just suggesting, if there was some interplanetary threat, Homo sapiens had come back together like that, start cooperating, working together. But there would be status grabs, just like there were in World War II. I'd like to suggest that thousands of young men died needlessly in World War II because there was status associated with who gets to get there first. It's clear we're winning, so who's going to get there so they can get the status? We can rise above that, but it's not going to be a top-down imposition of some ism on the people. It's going to be a bottom-up, inside-out realization of who we really are. That's why I'm betting everything I've got, every dollar, every calorie, every minute of my life, that you and people like you are going to do this starting with themselves. And as that begins to gain traction and grow and mature and evolve, the alternative is going to look less and less desirable. You won't have to be told that. It'll be self-evident. So, getting to the people who have tremendous amounts of status.
Can we pause for a second?
Sure.
I just want to absolutely underline what you've just said, because I think that firstly, it's incredibly inspirational that a man in his 70s is, I know it because I've observed you. Every single calorie is going towards sharing stillness in whatever way possible, because it seems like the way to, and I'm not saying stillness as like this has to be our right. No. It's there's no constriction there, but it's like sharing this ability in any way possible, in its purity, in as well a job as you can, because you're always growing and you're always highlighting new things, it's never going to be bloody perfect, because you know what, we're human. But to give everything that you've got to really bettering the outlook for our species, that is, it's awesome. And I couldn't agree more with you. It's like, there are so many signals that we are getting that we are in a very dire situation. And talking about hoarding status, you've got the people that have the most amount of resources trying to get the fuck off of the planet. And it's like, well, you think there's going to be a better one of these out there?
Well, we're going to go to one that's already worse off. Because it's preferable to this one. Why?
Status.
Humans.
Oh, humans.
That's the problem. Everybody's terrified of AI. AI's smart. What's the problem? Us. We can do something about that, or we can keep doing business as usual. That's all. And these people that I've had the great fortune to work with, these super high status people, try to remember something if you can, because I've tried to give them this. Don't forget, status is an artifact of a behavioral strategy that was adopted by a species that was going extinct. They were desperate. What I'd like to suggest is underlying that status, and we began to prove that to ourselves here today. This is verifiable. What underlies that status is this deep, energetic, universal fact of wholeness, completeness, connection, and balance. And the quieter you get, the more obvious that becomes. The more the narrative goes crazy, your limbic system starts throwing wild emotions, narrowing your vision so you can only see this little piece of the puzzle, you're going to behave in a completely sociopathic way. What I'm suggesting is some of these people who have genuine high social status because of what they've achieved understand that relative to the individual, as their sense of self begins to expand beyond, I'm a happening CEO, I'm a happening celebrity, I've got all this status, there's something much deeper. And as they begin to pursue that, you are talking about a miracle on two legs. You're talking about somebody who really now has status relative to the universe. And what that person can do in their own way, given all the resources, whatever they may be, or given no resources, materially speaking, you start really cooperating. We're not competing anymore. We're working together because the dirty truth is there's plenty of resources to go around. It isn't a zero-sum game. The reason the resources aren't getting where they need to get is some human group, based largely on status and fear, is impeding the flow of those resources. I'm not talking an ism here. I'm not talking socialism, communism. I'm not talking that. Some of the most philanthropic human beings I know on earth are very, very arch conservative, own everything people. But as individuals, they're giving things to people all the time. They just don't make a big ism out of it. And these people, once they realize, wow, I'm not clutching for some social status anymore. By being my best self, status comes anyway. That's the sort of horrible secret. The more you try to get it, the less you're going to have. Because this deeper energetic thing I'm talking about comes from really letting who you are deeply come out. Well, you got to discover that.
Can I try and guess what you thought about that question as I asked it?
Sure.
Okay, because this was again, this is just, it's so uncomfortable, but that's where I know that I'm at the edge, because that's where I know that I'm growing here.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, Jim, so you've worked with a bunch of high status people socially. Can you tell us how they navigate it? It's like, that in itself, you must have been thinking like, stasis grab, right? Because here's a clickbait question that will hopefully gain some traction on the internet so that, you know, people will be able to be like, oh, I wonder what the high status people think.
Sure.
And it's like, what a shallow way to approach this. However, the way that you answered it was, I'm going to work with these people because they're people at the end of the day. And that's the most refreshing thing for people of high status is people see them and not the status.
Yes.
You know, because it gets pretty corrosive when it's only the status that's getting recognized rather than the soul.
Yeah.
But you work with that and show them that cooperation is a real option.
Yes.
And that it's expansive and intrinsically rewarding.
Yes.
When done well.
Yes.
And I think that that's a beautiful way to answer such a shallow question. So thank you.
It's not a shallow question. What you did was expand right here at the table. You feel that?
Yeah.
This is in everything we do. These opportunities to expand. You don't have to go out to the ashram. Just in your next exchange, stop the narrative. Just take a breath. Hold it. And real slowly let that breath back out again. Feel this relax. And feel the energy without having to do all this crazy signaling of it. This energy starts moving through you. It's not from you, it's moving through you. Because the you I'm referring to is this separate egoic human body. Then you can come back into that experience and live the hell out of it. Because it will have so much more meaning to you. You're so much more appreciative of every day when you understand it from this deeper level. I mean, just astrophysically, I don't mean to be cute, but we're on this little blue ball. gorgeous little marble spinning around in infinite black space with stars that are fusing elements together by virtue of the energy created when their own gravity crushes things, and explosions, the likes of which we've never seen on Earth, are occurring constantly, spewing out new elements. Those elements are in you because of that. This enormous universe. And yet, as a human being, there isn't anywhere else so far we've been able to find, without some weird suit on or terraforming some other planet, that we can survive on longer than 30 seconds. How great is it to have this experience? I mean, you won the lottery. This interchange right here is a miracle if you can only perceive it. And the way to perceive it is not, well, what can I get out of it? Is my status going to go? But that narrative just limits who you are. You just get quiet. And we may not need to say anything. I've had whole 2-hour sessions with some of these clients where we just come in and say hi and just get still and stay there. Because all the status of what people call aggressive actions, like looking at somebody, looking directly at some, ooh, that's an aggressive act. Yeah, if you're only thinking social status, you get quiet enough. We do this thing. You, Spencer, the people of Still Life, do this thing as a group. We call a dyadic experience. We break huge groups up into two partners. They look at one another. They just sit and look this close to one another. They just look. And it is so uncomfortable because of all the status going on. They have no idea why, but their flesh is crawling. They just can't wait to look away or hope the other person looks away. They're like, what's going on? Then we breathe. We get still. And people come up out of that state and it's like, oh my God, there's a miracle sitting across from me. I can feel it. I know things. I can see things in this person that I couldn't imagine. Did they put drugs in our water? No. You stopped the narrative. You got quiet. And this energy, this field, starts to do what it does because it wants to. And for 25 minutes, there they sit in silence, having profound experiences, unless they block the experience. We're not doing it, they're doing it. I'm saying this is there for anybody. But you have to take these heroic first steps. Our culture doesn't support that. Our culture says, no, go for the status, more and more and more. They reward people for going for the status.
It makes so much sense because there is a direct correlation between mating opportunities, especially in males, and status.
Yes.
You know, if speak to any billionaire, they can get any girl they want.
Sure.
Right?
How?
Through money.
How does it feel to have to buy that?
I don't know.
How much status do you think you've actually got? That's why so many of them are unhappy. When they stop leading with how much money they've got, how much status they've got, and start leading with who they actually are, and somebody wants to be with them, and if the whole shooting match collapses and they're flipping burgers someplace, that person's going to be with them anyway. Because I am blessed enough to have a partner who will be with me if I'm flipping burgers or flipping multi-million-dollar mansions. because it has nothing to do with my social status.
And that's the stone cold truth, because I've never seen a partnership like yours and Peggy's.
Oh my God, I give it all to her, frankly. I mean, I'm impossible. Can you imagine what it must be like trying to go through a day with somebody who's just doing this all the time? Yeah, but when are we going to Ibiza? You promised we were going to take this, trip. We were going to ride the Orient Express. We were going to do all these things. She's right there. Being somebody who has so much of this energy, so much real status relative to the universe, that stuff starts gravitating toward her. And I mean gravitational pull toward her. Incredible. So thank you for even bringing this up, because status is so much deeper. It's so much more than just what shoes do you have on? Who are you hanging out with?
And I think that where it's taken traction in our society is through, like, how can I learn hacks to do in the bathroom
That's right.
before a job interview?
That's right.
And it's postural, but it's not necessarily as inquisitive.
Yeah.
And I think that with what you're doing, again, I just want to make a real point to thank you for all of this, because you've created a space to not only understand the scaffolding that underlies how we even see this, right? But also to allow, I'll speak for myself, me to become so vulnerable that I can share anything that I feel as if is going on within me with real gusto, because I know that on the other side of it isn't somebody that's looking to weaponize this to lower my status or to do anything like that. And that has been the most liberating skill to pursue, because the energy that it creates in a room has always been net positive. And I think that it's, again, talking about more residual traits that have come through us. Like, that's another one that I feel is residual, because I was so closed up and blocked off to sharing who and what it was that I was really in there. And so I want to just say thank you for allowing me and hopefully other people to gain that courage and to also be able to look within themselves, look at their behaviors, look at the behaviors at large of the species, and start to actually make some big decisions. I hope that is something that comes from it. And if not, I'm going to die trying.
We've done our best. But let me thank you for something, and maybe give you something that is absolutely win-win. By, again, my view, by your heroic willingness to be so open, vulnerable, and transparent. And I don't think it's just me. I think the people who are viewing this are watching this and really appreciating that. Your true status is going up, not down. The status that really counts, that lasts, is going up, not down, because you're not seeking status. Remember, seeking status is actually a very low status thing to do. I need it. I don't have it. The person who has status, real status, even in their behavior, can just give it away. They've got endless amounts of it to give away. Oh, please, after you. And you're getting to the point where you realize, wow, I've got this endless well of status, true status, relative to the universe, instead of this gaping hole that's trying to fill something that felt, because of a narrative, not because of what's true, because of a narrative, felt empty. Okay? So thank you, because you're doing an enormous service by demonstrating this stuff in the flesh and in the spirit. So thank you.
Stood on the shoulders of giants.
Aren't we all?
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yes, it was.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place, because the combination of Jim and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future, or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.